Hello, and welcome to Artic Consulting's webinar on grant proposal tracking solutions. My name is Catherine Baker, and I'll be working with James Burke, who is going to be presenting today. James is the senior manager here at Artic Consulting in the nonprofit practice. So he has the specialty in this area with a lot of information to share specifically around systems and solutions that can help with writing and tracking your grant proposals. And with that, I'll give this over to James. James, take it away.
Thank you, Catherine. And just a reminder, we are recording this today. I will send the recording out to all attendees as well as some other information. Yeah, we'd like to talk about grant proposals. Very important for nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits rely on grants as their primary funding mechanism. And I'm going to show you some ways you can manage multiple grant proposals at the same time, because that would really help a nonprofit have a steady stream of funding and ensure that their operations aren't impacted if they lose one grant. So what we'll be talking about today are a few things I'll go over. First, I'll introduce our company, Artic Consulting, and what we do for nonprofits. We have a lot of experience with nonprofits, as Catherine mentioned, and we'll be talking about a lot of the technology offers that are out there for free for qualifying nonprofits that we can help you get. I'll talk a bit about how you would track grant proposal writing and ways to do it today. And so I'm going to show you a sample workflow that could be used for your organization to set up this type of proposal creation process, as well as putting metrics on how everything is working and making sure you're building efficiencies. When you have a workflow like that, it is then really easy to build a work back schedule for your staff so that you aren't missing any deadlines and the staff has adequate time to respond to the grant proposal opportunity. And then finally, I'll show you how you can apply technology to doing this grant proposal activity and how you can get reporting metrics. I'll be showing you some new Microsoft Power BI reports that I've created as a sample for this. And then finally, we'll end with some Q&A time. So Artic, we've been around for about 3 years now. We're a Gold Microsoft partner, but we're not limited to only Microsoft. We have a lot of expertise with other technologies providers such as Google and Amazon. We specialize in cloud migrations and application development, as well as data and business analytics. And we do work for both nonprofits and for-profit companies. We have a lot of clients in the insurance and financial services industries. But between Catherine and I, we have about 25 years of experience serving on nonprofit boards. It's definitely a passion for us to help out nonprofits. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to start a consulting practice specifically for them. And we are a distributed team across the US. And one of the things we had to do last year with COVID was figure out how we can help our clients more with virtual meetings, but we've been old hands at this. We've been doing virtual working since we were founded. Now, one of the things we can do to help a nonprofit is show you the landscape of offers that are out there. If you're a 501c3 registered nonprofit with the IRS, there are several free opportunities you can take advantage of from Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, as well as other providers. For example, you can get 10 licenses of Office 365 for your nonprofit through Microsoft's philanthropy program. That would also give you some other tools as well, such as SharePoint, which we're going to show today. And you can also do things like your email and your collaboration of documents. You can make use of other free tools Microsoft has to manage your projects. There's a great tool called Planner we use a lot at Artic. And but Microsoft's not the only one that's out there. Google for Nonprofits is a pretty robust program as well, where you can get G Suite and Google Drive and Google Docs and Gmail for your nonprofit. Now, one of the things that a lot of companies and nonprofits are doing is moving to the cloud. And so Microsoft and Amazon are the two major cloud providers. You can essentially rent time on their data centers that they have around the world through their Azure and AWS programs. And as a 501c3 nonprofit, you're qualified for $3,500 a year in Azure credits from Microsoft. And you can also get $2,000 a year in AWS credits from Amazon. And that will help you do things like host your website. You can also create internal applications to help you run your nonprofit. And we have extensive experience with all of that, so we can help you leverage those credits that you can receive for free from those providers. So what I'd like to talk about, oh, sorry, I didn't realize those slides were not there. Yeah, like I said, we have extensive experience with both Microsoft and Amazon, Google as well, and helping nonprofits procure and leverage those offers. I just put out today a insight on our website, a blog post on our website, describing our new nonprofit solutions framework. Artic put this together. It's a roadmap of all the areas that a nonprofit needs to think about in terms of its technology and ways to apply modern technology to increase efficiency and enable new automated workflows. So ways that you don't have to have manual steps to do something. You can actually have the technology work for you and enable things to happen quickly. So there's a lot of areas here on this diagram, and today we're going to focus on grant management. And so that's that vertical on the top right, and talk about that. But we're going through a lot of these with our webinar series. Last week we talked about volunteer management, and we'll be talking about donor management next week. So check out our recordings of these if you're interested, and you can also register for the upcoming webinars by going to our site. So why track grant proposals? What's the point of doing that? One of the things that happens a lot in nonprofits, if they have a grant proposal they need to write, is the deadline creeps up on them, and they end up with a stressful push at the end of the cycle to get the document done and submitted, and they're scrambling to do some research, and maybe there's people working on different sections of the document, trying to coordinate all that. So by having a better sense of what your process is to reply to a grant proposal, you can avoid the mad rush at the end and the stress that comes along with it. Also, what you can do is you can actually work on multiple proposals at the same time and not lose track of anything. If you have a good understanding of how your organization works, then you can layer on technology to help you track everything. And that's the heart of what I'm going to talk about today. Another great reason to do a tracking solution for grant proposals is to give transparency to everyone involved in the organization, so that the executives of the organization, maybe some of the key donors, partners of the organization, giving them transparency as to what work is happening in the pipeline and who's working on what, and also which of the organization's program areas are being addressed by grants, is just better for everyone. If folks know what's happening, then they can pretty easily snap into helping, and also provide guidance and advice and just support of what's going on if they know what's happening. So giving transparency is another key reason. And then finally, consistency. If you're doing a process over and over again, you're going to get more efficient at it. And if you have a team of people doing a process over and over again, then everyone's going to learn how each other works, and they're going to anticipate what the others need. And it's just going to overall make everyone, the team as a whole, more efficient. And so we see this when we track these types of processes with metrics. When we look at response times and how long different steps in the workflow take, as people work on them, it always goes down for the most part. And so having a consistency in the process and having the process be well understood by everyone involved is a way to increase efficiency overall. And so doing more with less time. And then finally, transparency for donors. So donors are more likely to give to a nonprofit when they know where their dollars are going and also which programs are a priority. So according to one report, 41% of donors said that the information about which of the organization's programs produce the best results was an important factor in how and whether and how they decided to give. So if you're thinking about donating to a nonprofit and you can see through some transparency with the nonprofit how they're doing on one of their programs and how effective they are, you'll be more likely to donate to that nonprofit and its program. And so that's a reason for nonprofits to give additional transparency to donors, is to increase donations. So I'm going to walk through this diagram here, and this is a workflow example. Now, when we start working with a nonprofit, we always like to see how they're currently working, because a process like this can be tailored to a specific organization. What I'm going to talk about today with this example is what we've seen work in the past, but it may not work exactly the same for your nonprofit. So don't look at this as a cookie cutter process that everyone's going to just adopt and run with. You definitely want to tailor this to how your organization works, and that's what we would do if we worked with your nonprofit. So I'm going to kind of move from left to right on this diagram. There are 3 different swim lanes, those sort of rows across the diagram. The top one is the approver, and then this would be the tasks for a senior officer at the nonprofit that's in charge of deciding whether or not a grant proposal is worthwhile going after and whether it fits with the organization's mission. They also are going to be the ones at the end to review the proposal before it goes out, to review the finished document before it's actually submitted to the grant organization that's going to provide the funding. The middle swim lane is the owner of the proposal. You could think of this as a mid-level staffer that's going to kind of bird dog and champion the grant proposal getting done. They might be a project coordinator or project manager or a program area lead, but it's somebody that, and it may be somebody that's going to receive the funding for the grant proposal if the organization wins it, but it's somebody that's going to have the heartbeat of where this is at any given time, and they're sort of in charge of making sure this gets done. And so you can see one of the first things that happens is you're trying to assign the owner if there isn't one already. And then the bottom swim lane are the subject matter experts, or SMEs. That's an acronym that means subject matter expert. It's basically the people at the nonprofit that understand the most about the area. And it's not necessarily the same as the leader of the nonprofit or the project coordinator or program manager. It could be someone that's an expert in the field. It could be someone that's an advisor to the nonprofit. It could be a low-level staffer that's just going to help out with the document, doing some of the grunt work of writing the document and the logistics and the research around it. But the SMEs would do some of the work to complete the document that the owner didn't necessarily do on their own by themselves. So the first thing that happens in this workflow is you identify the grant opportunity. Now, there's a lot of places on the internet and people you can ask about what grants are coming up in your field and your sector for your nonprofit. That's kind of beyond the scope of our talk today. But let's assume that you have ways to find grant opportunities, that you're on the right mailing list, you're looking in the right on the right websites for different organizations, and maybe you have a way to find out about grants as they're being announced, before they're divvied out. But first you'd identify that opportunity, and then you take it to the senior officer and say, is this something that's worth going after? And we actually have a way to do this in the tool so that the approver gets an email that there is a new opportunity and is this worthwhile to go after, and they click the button to say yes. Next, once the organization decides this is worthwhile going after, you'd want to assign an owner to it, and this would be, again, the middle swim lane person, the one that's going to bird dog the process for getting the grant proposal written. That person would then review the grant requirements and see if those requirements are able to be met by the organization. Typically, that's the specific format of a document that needs to be created as part of the grant proposal submission. Often a grant proposal organization will have a Q&A period. So they'll allow people to ask questions, and then they'll post answers to all the organizations that ask questions. So that's where the generate questions comes in, and this was where the subject matter experts might help out and ask some questions that then would be sent in. You'd send those questions in, wait for answers to come back. Usually there's a period of time there, and then you'd receive the answers. The team would review them, and then they can start working on the actual grant proposal. Now, I want to bring in Catherine here because I know she's worked on grant proposals in the past, and at this point, that red square, Catherine, how would you actually proceed? Like, is this something where you're going to decide how to do the actual proposal and what that's going to look like moving forward? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, James. Yes, and to your point, in both profit and nonprofit, proposal writing is extremely important. And when you're applying to grants, especially when you're applying for government funding, they're very strict and really, you know, the dates are the dates, the rules are the rules, and having a process like this in place just keeps you, you know, focused, makes sure that you know all the dates and deliverables that are coming up. I've known people in the nonprofit world who have missed opportunities because they weren't aware of a date or they missed a date. So absolutely, this is very important. So sorry, I got down the path of importance of grants. The decision point. Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, no, I'm basically asking about the that red square in the middle of the diagram where we know we have the answers back. We're about to go write the document. How would you actually like divide up that work? You're not going to do it all by yourself generally.
Yep. No, sorry. Thank you. And yes, and that's, again, when writing really any proposal, but specifically for grants, you really want input from the team. So you then can split up and assign either different parts of a document or different parts of the proposal, depending upon the strength of different people within the organization. Oftentimes, especially with the government, be it federal, local, state, they require a lot of documentation. There's a lot of, you know, a lot of detail that they want in all of their assets. So it's really important to stay, to understand the details and being able to break up the work within the organization. You can then play to the strengths of the different people of what they know about the organization, what they can provide for the actual grant itself, and make it easier to kind of coalesce all of those pieces into one at the end of the process. I don't mean to give away what's happening in the future for your discussion, but it absolutely helps, makes this process go much faster, and again, really make sure that you're giving the right pieces to the right people. And then you can also continually reuse things, you know, overviews, financials, things like that, so you don't have to keep recreating the assets that you're providing, especially with some of the solutions that I think you're going to talk about next, you know, as far as document sharing and repository.
Right. Yeah, thanks a lot, Catherine. And so essentially, yeah, absolutely. So essentially, that red square is where you'd sort of decide what sections of the document do we need for the final proposal and assigning those out to people. And there's ways to do this with Microsoft Word and Microsoft SharePoint to make it so that people can work on this in a collaborative way, and then, you know, go off and work on their pieces, do the research they need to do, and then bring it back into a master document that then is used for the final review and submission of the proposal. And so that's essentially what's happening on this diagram here, where you're working on sections of the proposal, then you integrate those sections, and then get it ready to send to the senior approver, the senior officer at the organization to give it a review. They may have feedback when they do that. I know a lot of times when we review documents at Artic, there's feedback loops that we create, and then someone like me would go work on, take the feedback and go make some adjustments and send it back for another review. And I have that feedback loop built into this diagram here. But then finally, when it's approved to submit, then you'd send that off to the grant organization and hopefully win the grant. So next, once having this workflow in mind, it is now easy to build a workback schedule. So if you think about what are the major tasks and milestones here, I went ahead and put this sample project plan together. Now this is using a tool called Microsoft Project to build something called a Gantt chart, and that's what you see on the right side of that screen there. But I want to zero in on the overall timeline on the top. So there are 3 major milestones to this sample process. We're starting today, January 26th. For this sample grant opportunity, the questions are going to be due. They have a Q&A period where they ask for any questions, they'll post answers. The questions are due on Wednesday, the 3rd of February, and then the answer is going to come back about 2 weeks later. And then finally, the proposal is due on March 10th. So having those dates in mind, how would an organization go respond to that with that workflow on the last slide in mind? These are all the steps that you would follow to do that. And here's exactly when each step would start and stop, an estimate for how long it would take. Now, some of these aren't actually the amount of work it would be. Like, for example, assembling a virtual team for proposal writing, it's not really going to take you 3 days of effort to do that. It's more like that's how long it takes you to find the team, get everyone committed to a meeting, making sure that everyone is read up on what we're doing, so that the overall duration of that is going to take 3 days. The other thing to mention is each of these tasks are sequential. So typically on this project plan, a task has to finish for the next one to start. That's not always going to be the case in the real world. But in this example, just to keep things simple, I made it that way. And you can see the predecessors column describes which task has to be finished for this one to start. So you can see it's a very similar flow of tasks to what you saw on the workflow slide, the last one. And these are all tasks that you can assign owners to and track whether they're done and how long they took based on the estimate. Having a workback schedule like this and making sure people are tracking to it will avoid the stress at the end. It'll avoid the mad rush. Not having something like this, you might miss the question and answer period completely. And then a week before the proposal's due, you start working on it. And then you are rushing to finish that whole week, and it's very stressful for everyone involved. If you build a workback schedule like this, then you're going to avoid that situation, and everyone's going to have a much happier time doing this work than if they were rushing to finish at the end. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to track this with SharePoint and how to track multiple of these happening at the same time. And to do this, I'm going to bring in a fictional nonprofit that we're using for this example, which is Cascade Food Bank. This is a fictional organization that is a provider of food and supplies to the less fortunate in Seattle, where I live. The food bank is supported by donors, which include both individuals and other organizations. So they're writing grants to get the donations in some cases. They create multiple grant proposals per quarter to get the funding from those other organizations. They could be governmental, they could be for-profit companies, or philanthropic grants from other larger nonprofits. And the food bank uses these funds to procure the food and supplies, which are then distributed to the community by volunteers. Volunteers are responsible for everything about this organization, including writing the grant proposals. So having them in mind, let's take a look at the solution. So this is built using Microsoft SharePoint, and I'm going to pull it up here. So I'm going to make the font a little bit bigger for people to see. And so this is what's called a SharePoint list. You can think of it as an Excel spreadsheet but it's all up in the cloud. And as I'm working on this, each row on this is a grant. As I'm working on this, another person would actually see my updates in real time. And so each row on this SharePoint list is a grant that the organization is going after. So you can see there's a lot of information that it's tracking here. It's tracking who's the owner of the grant, who's the approver of the grant. Now, in all cases, we've put Catherine and I, when the questions are due and when the answers are posted, and then when the grant opportunity is due in. So those same 3 milestones you saw on the timeline of my project plan is what's here on the right. And those are generally what you'd get from a grant organization, in addition to information about the grant itself. Now, as I create a new one of these, there's a couple things that happen. The status is initially set to initial review, and there's quite a few statuses. Let me just show you that field. I'll go ahead and create a new item just to show you the status field. Here's all the different statuses that this solution has, and it maps to those steps in the workflow that I showed you earlier. First, you look at the grant opportunity, see if it works out, if it's a good match for the organization. That would be the initial review. And then once the approver, the senior manager at the organization, says that it's a good opportunity, it would be moved to approve to proceed. Then you'd assign it to an owner, questions sent, answers available. You'd work on the proposal, then it would be ready for review. If it needed some updates to it, it would be kicked back and it would say updates needed, then approved for submission, and then finally submitted. Now, I can come in on a given day if I'm working on a lot of these proposals and look at this, and this is sort of my dashboard for the day, and I can say, okay, which ones do I need to work on today? Which ones have questions due coming up? Which ones are assigned to me to create the proposal, or to go figure out the initial question list, or ready for submission? I can come in and say, okay, great. The proposal we wrote last week has now been approved. I can go submit it now. So at a glance, I can see all the things that are happening for my grants across the organization. Now, if I go ahead and add a new row to this, we have this SharePoint list connected to something called Power Automate, which will generate an email to the approver that they need to review something. So not only is this a great tool to come look at, it will actually generate notifications to the other people involved at the nonprofit. So here's an example of an email that Catherine would get if I went ahead and created a new row. She'd get an email that said, hey, there's a new grant proposal that you need to review and approve, a new opportunity you need to review and approve, and she'd be able to approve it right from her Outlook email client. And so she doesn't even have to come to this solution to participate in the process. Once she clicks approve, it will automatically flip this initial approval to yes, and it will advance the status column from one step to the next step. Likewise, when it's at the end of the process, I can flip this to ready for review, and that'll generate an email that she will get to go approve the final document. And once she approves it, then I will get one that says, hey, this proposal has been approved for submission, and here's the link. So now you can go send it out to the grant organization. So because the system is generating emails, it just makes the cycle quicker. People will get notified when it's their turn in the steps. They don't have to come check this constantly to see where something is. They will actually get notified. And there'll be ways to tie this as well to mobile devices. You can get a text message or a mobile notification when one of these steps advances and it's your turn to do something. That's all possible really relatively easily with Power Automate and SharePoint. Okay, so when you have a solution like this in place, it also allows you to generate a lot of data that you can use to measure your progress. And so next, what I'd like to show you is a dashboard I've created for an organization that would basically show you all the ways that the organization is using grants and how effective they are at it. So this is a grant dashboard in Microsoft's Power BI tool. And this is the data that I'm working with here in this top left area. You can see there's 5 grants in the system. Some of them I was the owner for, some of them Catherine was the owner for. It shows what program in the nonprofit they roll up to. So some of these are for food procurement, some of these are for supply procurement. And it shows things like the month they were awarded, the amount that was awarded, and how long we took to create the proposal. So how many days did it take for us to run that workflow to create the proposal document that we eventually won. Now, what's great about Power BI is I could do a lot of things with this data. This little data table here, there's a lot of things I could do with it. And you can see these graphs that show different different elements of the data in different ways visually. So I can see at a glance, by looking at this pie chart, how are my 2 programs stacking up against each other in terms of the amount of grants they've won. Just looking at that pie chart, and as we add more grants into the system, this will automatically update. I could also look at, for this month, what was the largest grant that we won. And you can see, in this particular month, this was November, I believe, there were 2 grants that were won, and the biggest one was grant 4. I can also look at, for all of the grant owners, what's the average proposal time. So we have all these different individual proposal times. What's the average based on who owned the grants? And that shows it here. So Catherine's average is 18 days. So she's actually churning these out quicker than I am. So that's a good data point to know. Also, where are grants coming from? So what's not on this table up here is which organizations are giving us the money. And there's, in this example, there's 2. There's the Seattle Philanthropy Foundation, which is not a real one, and the Northwest Council of Communities. Both of those are fictional. But the Northwest Council is giving us 3 grants, and that accounts for 60% of our overall grants. And the Seattle Philanthropy Foundation is giving us 2. So again, where's the money coming from? You want to have a diverse set of sources of funding for your organization to weather when you lose an individual grant. It's not going to impact your organization in huge ways, and being able to track that is important. One last thing I want to show you, Power BI is actually so smart, you can actually ask it questions in natural language. So I can say things like, what's the average proposal time by, let's see, I'll do by program. And that immediately tells me that I'm actually quicker getting food procurement grants than I'm getting in supply procurement. So supply procurement, 35 days on average. Food is 21.6 days on average. So, and what's great about Power BI is I can now pin this graphic to the dashboard and have this permanently if I wanted to. But it'll generate, it's so smart it can generate graphs for you just by asking questions. So great tool. We'd love to work with you on using it for your nonprofit, and it's one of the many tools that are available to you as a qualified nonprofit from Microsoft. So, so with that, I want to go ahead and see if there are any questions, and I'll switch back to my slides, and let's see if there's anything that's come in since I've been talking.
Hey, James. Yeah, actually, this is a great question, and one that we come across with a lot of nonprofits that we work with. If they currently have G Suite, can you still use a solution from Microsoft? So the interchangeability between the different tech providers.
Yeah, so definitely if you are currently using G Suite now, and you're like, well, why would I want Microsoft? I have G Suite already. Or am I going to have to switch everything over? You actually aren't. You can have both. You can continue using G Suite. You're probably using it for your email. You've probably got a lot of documents stored up in Google Drive. You may be using some of their other features like forms. You can continue to use that and still go apply for the nonprofit grant from Microsoft or the grant from Amazon. They're not mutually exclusive. You can have more than one of these. And I actually recommend, if you're a large nonprofit, to just go get them all, because there may be individual programs at your organization that use one and not the other, because maybe it's a better fit for what you're trying to do. So definitely there's ways to use them together as well. Power Automate, for example, from Microsoft works with all the Google products. And you can actually tie in a Google form into SharePoint and have data fed in that way. Or you can use, Google spreadsheets to feed data in as well. So there's lots of ways that they can work together.
Okay. And then another question, do you know how many user licenses are given with the free 501c3 offer that we're talking about? I know we talk about a lot of tech solutions, but with this one with Microsoft.
Yeah, so if you apply for the Microsoft Philanthropy Program and you're a 501c3, they're going to give you, at the moment, this may change, but at the moment, they're going to give you Business Premium, Microsoft 365, 10 licenses for free. And then from there, you can add more on. So if you're a larger nonprofit and you want more than 10 licenses, you can actually purchase more and still have the 10 for free. And I think I have a slide on my deck that actually has the cost structure. Let me see if I can pull that up. But another thing is the license can be reassigned. So if you have temporary, say you have seasonal volunteers and you want to just temporarily give them a license to use Microsoft Office or email, you can do that. And then once they're done volunteering, you can assign that license to someone else. And it doesn't mean you have to delete that first person completely out of your system. They could still have a user account, but you're just going to move that license from one person to another. So even a nonprofit that has more than 10 people involved could still make use of those 10 licenses smartly. Yeah, so this one, yeah, the first column there is the 10 free licenses. I believe it's around $3 to $5 for additional licenses after that. And then you can see there's also some other plans available if you wanted to upgrade to one of the enterprise level Microsoft offerings that gives you additional tools, additional capacity on your email and SharePoint and OneDrive. Like for example, OneDrive, the cloud storage will only give you 100 gigabytes on that first plan, but if you upgrade to one of the enterprise level ones, it's basically unlimited. You can have as many documents up there as you want.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay, thanks. That helps a lot, and I think I think you've already answered some of the other questions with the actual presentation and specifically with your Power BI demo. So.
Okay, awesome. Good. So let me go back to my. Where is it? I have a couple slides to go over to just talk about the benefits of what we talked about, the solution there. All right, so this slide, a solution like the one I just showed you with SharePoint Power Automate, it provides the following benefits. It's going to streamline your overall process to give you automatic reminders so that the team can plan ahead. The fact that it's doing that in the background, that you don't have to maintain that manually, is a way to automate your operations. So as much as you can apply technology to automate your operations at your nonprofit, the better off you're going to be, because it's going to free people up that were doing manual things in the past. Also, the nature of this solution is that it's digital and it's centralized. So you're not going to need to store things in a file cabinet anymore. You can put everything up in the cloud. It's safe, it's secure. Lots of businesses use it for mission critical operations. Governments use the cloud as well. Microsoft and Amazon have all the security certifications they can possibly get to keep the data secure. As long as you're giving out the permissions correctly, they're very secure solutions. And the fact that these are centralized means that multiple people can use them at the same time. You're not having to email documents around and losing track of who's got the most recent copy. You save it up in the cloud, send a link to everyone. There's easy ways to do that within all the Office tools now, and everyone's got the latest version of the document. This solution can also be tailored. So what I showed you with the grant proposal table in SharePoint, you can actually add more columns to that if you wanted to track different things about each grant, if you wanted to track different team members on there, if you wanted to track more details about the programs, you could do that as well. So all of this can be tailored to match how your organization works and the information you care about. So what else could we do to extend this solution? Well, there's a couple things we could do. We mentioned splitting the document up and having people work on different parts of it. Well, that could be automated too. You can actually have a solution that would, someone like Catherine or I would be the owner of the grant proposal, and then we could send out reminders to everyone through the tool that they have a section of the document they need to work on. Here's the template for it. Here's the sort of sample version of it. Go work on this, send it back in, and we'll review those and approve those individually, and then merge them back into the master document. That all could be automated with reminders, reminder emails, so that, again, the team's working more efficiently, and it would reduce the amount of manual work needed by the owner of the grant proposal. As you're doing something like that, you could also save commonly used sections. Catherine mentioned that a lot of times she'll reuse a section of a document from grant to grant because it's basically the same. Maybe it's an overview of the organization, or maybe it's an overview of the program, and that's not going to change based on, month to month. So that could be put into a reusable template and then just included automatically. And SharePoint has ways to facilitate you doing that really easily. You could add, as I mentioned, you could add additional information on the programs and initiatives that'll be covered by the grant, and have that tracked in the system along with the grant details themselves. And then in terms of the reporting screen, I showed you the Power BI screen. What are some other things we can show on that? Well, how about success rate? How about looking at all the different grant opportunities that were responded to versus wins, and seeing which areas were more likely, or which owners were more likely to win grants? That's an important metric that organizations often want to track. How about looking at historical grants from each source of funding? One interesting statistic I saw recently is that if you've received a grant from an organization and you go back to them, there's a 80 to 90% success rate. So you're more likely to get a grant, a repeated grant from an organization than a new organization. So looking at the historical grants you've received from each source and spotting trends there and seeing, hey, is it time to go see if they have other grant opportunities, because it's been a couple years since we got one from that one. That would be another way to track reporting in a reporting view. And then finally, tracking where the funds ultimately go. Now, this is something I'm going to go into next week when I talk about donor management, but it's really important to track where the grant money actually is spent, because that provides that can provide transparency back to the grant organization and also to donors to enable them to feel good about giving you more money. And so also, if you received a grant, there may be legal or other requirements that you need to track where those funds ultimately go and how they're spent to make sure you're adhering to the terms of the grant. So that all can be done with technology as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit in the next webinar. So, so with that, I want to thank everyone. If you enjoyed learning about this, and would like to have us come help you and your nonprofit, please feel free to book time with me using my bookings tool. There's the URL. I will send you a follow-up email to everyone that registered for this webinar, with the links I've showed you today, the decks, and the links to the recording. And here's as well a few things. Basically, we have some case studies, and we have a couple of insights on our blog. And I just put one out today, and I'd like to show that to you. So this would be the Nonprofit Solutions Framework. Again, I showed this at the beginning, but I didn't go into a lot of detail. Next week, we're going to talk about donor management, and we're going to track how profiles are created, and how those funds could be spent, how donations map to programs. But you can get a preview of all this by reading this blog post, and I'll include a link to that as well. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week.